All right, so I'm persuaded that I've made, persuaded through my own thinking that I've been too hasty in uh, the attempt to sweep away the modification or observation or adjective transcendental from the project of Meskerlich entirely. So we can't remove that in toto. But how so far can we still claim that this is a distraction from the essence of the issue? So that we want to understand that which is named by the rubric Heidegger, which we, as it were, take on faith to be something more than a authoritative language game, but rather something more like that which we are given to understand by the notion of the language is the house of being, word of Heidegger's. How so far are we justified in this distinction between the essential grasp of what's going on in Meskerlich and, contrary to that, this question of how we connect to the perceived ideas up to that point under the title of the transcendental. What's at issue here is whether in the transformation of the question of any possible experience in Kant, where the question's asked in the horizon of what becomes Eddington's two tables of the and what was in Descartes the two substances plus the plus God, which cannot be understood as a substance. Seen in that light, the transcendental becomes a question of how the first substance, the substance which corresponds to physics, it becomes the second substance, the substance that corresponds to the human soul, or to the region of being. If you read Aristotle, you'll see he uses the word psyche, or psyche, or soul, has a name of a kind of region, and he uses the word physis, or nature, as the name of a kind of region, and these two regions overlap, so that we're talking about a kind of externality and a kind of internality, but in a way that's I guess worked out by force of the basic division between those things which, like the waters in Heraclitus, can be divided and then therefore infinitely divided in the Zeno problems, and those things which cannot be divided, which admit of no halves, no halfways. So, for instance, if we speak of sight, you can't have half. I mean, half sight could mean poor sight, or being in some way deprived of sight, or being the kind of being that could see but having been born blind due to a birth defect or something. But in the proper sense, there's no have sight. There's either beings that have sight and have the potentials for sight and could have bad sight, could have good sight, beings which are in some way linked to sight, and then there's beings that aren't. This place of the things that can't be divided, of the species or kinds, is the basic separation we're dealing with. But in that horizon, the question of any possible experience is asked only about what we're now calling, these days calling nature, which is the region where things can be divided, at least potentially infinitely, right? Yes, I know there's supposedly an authoritative theory about the Planck length and blah blah blah, and no, I don't think that's I think it's already been overturned, actually, even by that rabbit, the Hassan Fielder, or whatever her name is given some lecture which is, so far as we all must accept on authority some things because we can't do everything ourselves. It sounded to me like this theory of the Planck lengths has been strongly discredited so far as it's to be, not so far as it's consistent and it can you can do some things with it, but so far as it can't be superseded by something that can go to a smaller measurement. So taken this way, we must understand Kant to be dealing with this question of how you can get to the things which can't be divided from the so-called natural or phenomenal world. And this is then the horizon with this notion of the transcendental as time and as the conditions of any possible material experience. I'll qualify it that way, as time and space then arise. But this is not the way transcendental is used in Sein und Zeit or by Heidegger, and indeed it's already a fixed usage from not just Husserl, but from a deep tradition of the going back to the schoolmen, going back to the Middle Ages, which was, of course, as Strauss says, Brentano was a kind of strange scholastic, in some ways, reviving the dead language of Aristotle, as it were, for the age which had been, whose flesh had been intoxicated like a heated, sweltery New York Avenue in the evening in a Martin Scorsese movie or so, before the the kind of lights changed in the 70s or 80s or so. This vision in Kant of a specific form of the transcendental in Heidegger named something, as I was trying to indicate, was already had a foundation in a deep, authoritative, and possibly justified by the most impartial thinkers, not impartial, but the best thinkers. Instead of asking the question of any possible experience of making this division, which in a way is closer in contact with the tradition of dividing between any possible form of subject, and with Brentano's theory, the subject linked by an intention to another world, right? If somebody's has a will to do, it must be a will to do something related to some action, right? Or a wish, or somebody is afraid. The fear must be towards something, like in this way, by the way, this is how Hobbes constructs his theory based on the Galilean notion of entropy in the vacuum, by regarding every action in a way according to without having the concept of intentionality. He nonetheless since he regards everything as due to a passion rather than anything as being purely rational, then you can say when somebody makes a decision, or when somebody makes a contract, which was even better, because that was the dawn of liberalism, was really the best summed up by the Henry Sumner Maine quote about not by birth but by contract. So this freedom of contract, which in Hobbes' time in the 17th century involved swearing an oath, meaning what you're saying is you have a fear of God, just like today any Supreme Court justice or anybody in public life in America has to swear to the capital cult, which really just means what they're saying is, even though it looks like I'm corrupt and I'm only out for to be able to hold this high position and have military guards for the rest of my life and be able to murder people in other countries but not have to suffer the consequences and so on, only because I want to have presidents above all other human beings on earth and occupy these high offices. That's how so today it appears that way to quite a few people. And then what they say is, but we believe in profiles in courage and in doing things just because they're right rather than because they're efficacious or because they're in that situation. They're some kind of Roman desire to get things done comes in, and no, we put all that aside to say, let the sky fall, but right will be done. So they swear to this as though they had believed, in other words, in the immortality of the suke, which is what Descartes is trying to prove. And so we have there the way that public life interacts with all these questions. But in any case, in Heidegger, when he uses the word transcendental, it has a rich tradition which isn't the one that the Koinisbergian is working with. It has a different color, so that's why I think there's a big confusion there, that just as a verbal confusion, and then the second stronger confusion, I think, is that just because Heidegger operates with a specific kind of the transcendental, which is basically, like I was trying to get at, between something like the way Hobbes connects everything to passion, thereby making it not really mean anything to talk about a suke, because the suke is, the main thing about the suke is it leads to nous, and nous is totally outside the world of the changing things, or the things that can be divided, or the nature or whatever. They're in the unchanging things. But as long as you don't need the unchanging things, as in Hobbes' system, the first liberal system, which then grew and grew and became probably in its apex in Hegel, the super the dawn of historicism and liberalism proper, I would say, even though, of course, Hegel, relative to the Prussian liberals who wanted to put representation prior to the what Plato asked for in the metaphor of the ship of state, where he says he wants a pilot that actually knows his business rather than just somebody that the masses put in office because they like him, or of course, or more realistically, somebody that the billionaire class or the ancient wealthy of Athens put in power because they like him. So there's a lot of questions around that, and this second one I think is how so far the fact that there's a transcendentalism which is merely saying that there's a difference between the world of the things that can be divided and the world that can't be divided. That's you see, once you get into considerations like that, it floats away, where it becomes more like we're dealing with are we dealing with something that's comparable to a kind of painting? So for instance, so far as Cubist painting is a kind of painting, and it's a kind of painting where you could say what it means in some sense. Like Cubist painting is painting that deals with several points of view put forward at the same time. And then you say, oh, there's different kinds of painting, and there's different kinds of authoritative language games. And in some of the authoritative language games, people have started to understand the term transcendental in this way. And in others of them, they were still understanding it in that way, right? As soon as you get into that kind of problem, then you see that it's as though we must put this name, Heidegger, with a rubric that stands over to philosophy as something that has an essential understanding, which then says, this concept of transcendental is this important or this unimportant to my philosophy. I use it, but how much emphasis do I put on it? You must kind of posit a Heidegger and then a sense of how much weight Heidegger puts on each term he's using. And then you see the transcendental plays a totally different role for him than it did for Kant. And then you also want, at the same time, a more exacting understanding of what it does say.